the More Than Muscle series. I've literally, on a side note, just before I hopped on the call with you, Ollie, I was like, shit, I better name this. So I've decided more than muscle. The reason for that being, when I first got into this fitness journey, I just wanted to gain muscle. I just wanted to look better. I had literally zero idea about health, sleep, stress, any of this stuff. And then that's evolved now into this kind of lifelong journey of optimizing health, personal development, and overall just becoming a better human, physically and mentally. So that's probably something that you can relate to as well, Ollie, in this. So rant over, that's how the title came to be. So today I'm joined by Mr. Ollie Carson, who is a full-time online coach and runs an online coaching business called Condition by Carson. And thanks for taking time out to speak to us today, Ollie.
No problem at all, mate. Thank you for having me, and massive kudos for the impromptu decision making with the name, man. It's a good name. It works well.
Hopefully it's not taken, actually, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna delve into today. So just before we start, we are smack bang in the middle of COVID-19. So for any listeners that this conversation is going to be orientated around that, but for any listeners that might listen to this when hopefully the world is back to normal, there's still going to be a lot to take from it with what we're talking about. But first, so to get straight into it, Ollie, you work with a lot of physique and body composition orientated clients. How have you found this time dealing with that?
Yeah, it's been tough because, like you say, a lot of my clients are really, really concerned about their body composition. A lot of them are working towards very specific goals that require them to be training optimally, require them to have, really, really good nutrition protocols in place. And so I had to decide early on what approach I took with them in terms of, how honest and forefront I was with them, because at the end of the day, you could send someone into a bit of an anxiety down spiral if you're completely upfront and say, look, things aren't going to be optimal right now. But I decided in the end that would be the best approach to take, and just say, look, things aren't going to be the best that they can be right now. But we need to maintain a positive mentality around everything that's happening and really focus on what we can control as opposed to what we can't control. And I think if you can back that up with some knowledge around, just hypertrophy in general, things that we can do to make sure that they're best equipped to continue progressing, or at least retain their progress, it kind of puts their minds at ease, So things that I've been hammering home with my clients at the minute who are really concerned with their body composition is things like, okay, there are 3 mechanisms of hypertrophy. We know that you need mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Now, mechanical tension, i.e. the amount of weight that's crossing a joint, how much weight you're lifting, that's not going to be something that we can pay a lot of focus on right now, but we can focus a lot on metabolic stress. So, working in higher rep ranges, working closer to failure, using drop sets, using supersets, using shorter rest periods, isometrics. So we've switched focus, and we've obviously reprogrammed all of our training so that we are paying more attention to that side of things than we are mechanical tension, which is what we would normally be doing in the gym. And they're bought into that, they're bought into that idea, and they're happy with that. That in conjunction with good nutrition, which I'm sure we could touch on. And we're making the most of a bad situation, as I'm sure you guys are as well. And it's just about trying to stay positive, isn't it? Otherwise we'll all go a bit stir crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because even when it comes to training, like that's something we'll get into in a few minutes, is just about, I think, how like it's very, especially with clients, like you would have had that reaction when gyms close, like, oh my God, like the world is over, especially when you're physique oriented. And it's a common thing. There's nothing wrong with that reaction, because that's what you would essentially think. This situation we're in right now is something that has never happened before. I think I even seen Tony Doherty put up the other day, it's the first time in 21 years his gym is closed, something like over 7,500 days. So again, it's not a normal situation. So I think that response with that kind of worry is completely normal, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when it comes to your clients, is what kind of main things have you been focusing on at the moment? Because obviously without the gym.
Well, it's interesting because it's allowed us to focus on things that we potentially may have been neglecting a little bit previously. You know, usually, and I'm sure you're in agreement with this, most guys and girls, they're heavily focused on what their gym training sessions look like, how frequently they're training, yes, diet as well, but then all of the other things outside of that that you mentioned previously, your mindset, your sleep, your recovery, your just health optimization, all of those different facets that are incredibly important to our overall progress were maybe falling to the wayside ever so slightly. Whereas now we've got this great opportunity where we can't focus as much on getting to the gym and having these amazing training sessions, or let's pay a little bit more attention to our sleep and our recovery. So I'm taking that case by case with each client, and, you know, noticing from previous check-ins with those clients, etc., where potentially they were falling short, and saying, right, well, this is this great opportunity that we have now to improve on those things. And if we can do that for long enough, then hopefully those good habits will cross over to when COVID-19 decides to bugger off and we can get back into some normality and we can keep those new good habits in place. And then all of a sudden we've got a better client or a better athlete or whatever. So I'm, again, trying to take the positives from a bad situation. It's been a really good opportunity for me as a coach to help bring guys and girls on in areas that they were potentially lacking in previously.
Yeah, that's literally kind of the approach I've been taking, is that habitual side of it. Because obviously with the gym, for most people, that is nearly the cornerstone of their routine. It's like everything's worked around the gym. So when that's taken out, I'm kind of looking at it from that situation of, okay, like your routine is going to have to change anyway, but why not let's develop some habits now that we've maybe neglected in the past, so that when you go back to the gym, you are in actually a much better position than you are now. Because like obviously a lot of people are worried about losing their gains or losing their progress, like losing muscle essentially. But if when gym again, so you better have a strong mindset, you're managing your stress, you're putting your body in the best position it could possibly have ever been in to actually not only regain anything lost, but improve by a lot more, you know?
Yeah,
So,
100%. And just, again, just like elaborating on that slightly, because you mentioned there, you know, optimizing all of those different things and bringing down stress and improving sleep and all of those different things. Like, it's important that we're focusing on those things now more than ever, you know, and that's a message that I'm trying to convey to the guys and girls is, I know that you may have neglected this previously, but now more than ever, we need to make sure that those things are absolutely where they need to be if we're going to do the best job possible at retaining your muscle mass. So again, it's getting the guys and girls to buy into that with that notion, you know, we need to be focusing on that now because we can't train the way that we potentially would.
yeah. And so that's kind of moving into the next question with home workouts. Have you found many people like worried about having to train from home and the losing muscle?
Sorry, I heard you broke up a little bit there, but you were saying about home workouts. What was that? What was the question? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, the connection went a bit AWOL there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically with home workouts, have you had kind of much worry with people about losing muscle? And kind of you've covered that already, but about kind of the mechanisms of hypertrophy. But from like a psychological aspect, did you have much of that?
Yeah, definitely. Again, you know, a lot of my client base are heavily focused on body composition. I prep a lot of guys and girls who are preparing for bodybuilding shows, doing photo shoots, things of that nature. And so obviously a lot of their focus and attention is on their body composition, how much lean mass they have, how much fat mass they have. So you take someone's gym away, and like you touched on, I think it's only natural that people are going to be a little bit concerned about losing muscle, especially when they've worked so hard for so long to get to a certain point. We can only expect them to feel that way. But, you know, I've done as good a job as I can at reinforcing the fact that, you know, one of my favorite messages to tell them is that the amount of training volume that you need to retain muscle is far less than what you need to build it. And people are safe in that knowledge. You know, if you can get people to understand that and you can show them the research supporting that, then that helps them to, you know, not stress so much. We're also doing things like, from a nutritional standpoint, you know, if I've got somebody, I've had a couple of instances where people are particularly lean, they've been prepping for photo shoots or competitions. And it's like, look, you know, the likelihood of those things going ahead now are quite slim. We don't know how long this is going to go on for. We should really be switching our focus to retaining as much muscle as we can. And it might be a better idea to move you up to more like maintenance calories, because you're going to be in a slightly more anabolic environment than if you were in a deficit of calories, for example. And so again, it's getting people to understand that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that they are retaining as much muscle as possible, taking the sets at home as close to failure as we can, training more frequently at home if we can. You know, if we're training with bands and light dumbbells, our ability to recover from those sessions is going to increase massively. And so we can train each muscle group more frequently than we would if we were training in a gym with lots of weight and lots of different pieces of kit. So we're using all of these little things in conjunction with one another to A, have them retaining as much muscle as possible, and B, keeping them psychologically in a good place, knowing that we've got them on track. So, and I think that's all you can do.
Definitely. Like, what's your thoughts on kind of muscle loss with home workout training? Because obviously, like, if you look at social media right now, there's 20,000 home workouts possible to do, you know, and a lot of them, to be honest, probably aren't the best created things you've ever seen. So again, what do you think about muscle loss with home workouts?
I think some home workouts are better than others from what I've seen. I've seen some amazing, innovative ideas using minimal pieces of equipment that will provide great stimulus. And, you know, if implemented correctly, will do a pretty damn good job at preventing a lot of muscle loss. But also, I think, again, going back to having like knowledge and experience in this area and passing that knowledge on to your clients and saying, look, even if we do experience some muscle loss here, because let's be honest, we might lose a little bit of muscle. You're not going in and you're not leg pressing your normal 400 kilos or whatever. You're now doing like a squat against the wall with a foam roller. You know, we've got to be honest, you might lose a bit of muscle, but it's understanding that muscle memory is a real thing. Okay, so that the idea that we have myonuclei, we have satellite cells that will stick around despite losing the tissue. The myonuclei stays around, and then when we go to rebuild that muscle subsequently, we will regain that tissue very, very quickly, much quicker than we built it the first time round. So it's understanding that, okay, we might lose a little bit of muscle with these home workouts if you've got really limited equipment, but we will regain it very quickly as well once we come out the other end of this. So let's just focus on what we can do and not get too bogged down with what we can't. And that's all we can do, isn't it?
Yeah, because that's even my kind of thoughts is like, I think what happens here, obviously, with the gyms closing, people are kind of freaking out because you don't have access to the equipment, you don't have access to that heavier loading. But when you actually break hypertrophy back down, it's, you know, it's not about the exercises, sets and reps. It's a signaling dependent process that requires a stimulus and tension. So yes, using a gym is probably the most efficient way to get those things and having equipment and heavier loading, but it's still possible to create that stimulus and tension through other ways at home. So I think sometimes for people, especially that may not have that knowledge with nutrition, they're like, or with training, they're like, I can't do any of these exercises, like I'm gone, like everything I see is just going to be gone. When really there is quite a lot you can do at home when you know, choose the right exercises and understand those principles. So that's why
and it's given me, it's gone. Sorry, I cut you up there because the connection went a bit. I was just saying that it's given me a wicked opportunity as a coach. I'm sure it's the same for you, to program these nasty, sadistic training sessions with this kit that the guys and girls have got. And the general feedback that I'm getting is like, these sessions are harder than what I'm doing at the gym. And it's because we're programming it in a way where we're making the most of what we've got. We're taking them to failure more frequently. And it's exactly what you said. We're providing a stimulus, despite the fact that we're not using all those elaborate pieces of equipment. Yes, you know, if we've got those pieces of equipment at our disposal, we're going to use them. You know, we're not saying that this is the best way to train, but it is a sufficient way to train. If the goal is retaining muscle, it will do the job. And the quicker that we can get our clients to buy into that, the more successful they're going to be, because their mentality and mindset towards the whole process is going to be really key. You know, if you've got one client who has the same equipment at home as another client, but they've got completely different mindsets. One says, I'm going to make most of this. I'm going to train super hard. I'm going to follow the program. I'm going to make sure my nutrition, my sleep and recovery is in check. That person's going to retain a good deal of their muscle. And you've got the same person with the same kit who has the opposite mindset, who says, what's the point? I can't be bothered. They're ordering pizza every night. They're staying up playing Call of Duty till 3 o'clock in the morning. They're going to lose muscle mass. So buy into this guy over here, be positive, do what you can with what you've got, and we will be absolutely fine.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something like you mentioned with earlier about neglecting certain aspects of it, like stress and sleep for training as well. When you do this type of training, I think there's a lot that can come out of it for people when they get back to the gym. Like, for example, actually going to failure, knowing what failure really feels like. Because when you're doing a set of like 30, 40 reps and you're going to failure, like a lot of people wouldn't have done that or don't know what real failure feels like. So it's like that. That's something you could take back into the gym, you know? So that's the same like your technique, tempos, being able to feel muscle contracting. These are things that you can be working on now at home so that you can bring them back into the gym as well. And it's only, like you said, any muscle is going to come back fast. And if you have those tools on top of it, you're creating a much better athlete, you know?
100%. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm absolutely certain that we're going to see a lot of gym rats prior to this back in the gym in a few months' time after training at home with better form, better tempo, better control, everything. And that's going to cross over to more progress on the other side. So again, being that hopeless optimist, you know, I'm trying to see the good in a bad situation, as I'm sure you are as well. We're going to have better clients, better athletes once we're back in our gyms, because making use of the equipment at home, we need to focus on form, tempo, control, all of those different things. So you're 100% right. And I totally agree with that.
So I'm going to take a bit of a pivot now. I know you're a bodybuilder, so you've competed in bodybuilding, but something you did not too long ago, I think it was last year or the year before, was an Ironman. I'm right?
Yeah.
First of all, just tell me what's involved in an Ironman, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get sick when you tell me.
So I can't actually remember the numbers completely. I think it's 2.6 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then a marathon. And you have to do it within 17 hours to like actually complete the Ironman. So yeah, I did that 2 years ago now, I think. Yeah, it's actually flown by. And you know what? Go on, sorry.
Go on, you go on, yeah.
I was going to say that was actually really beneficial for me now, because, you know, I trained for 8 months for the Ironman, and I lost about 30 pounds. So obviously a lot of that was muscle mass, because you physically can't fit in resistance training when you're training 6 hours on the bike and then you're going for a run and then you're swimming in the morning. Like, you physically can't fit in resistance training. Yeah. So I lost a lot of muscle mass. And I got really, really light. And when I saw how quickly I bounced back from that after the Ironman, and I got back into bodybuilding, start training training with weights, I was like, oh, you know, muscle memory is a real thing. Like, even though I knew the research and I knew all the ins and outs of it, actually physically seeing it happening before my very eyes was really reassuring for me. So I am walking proof that you can lose 30 pounds of muscle and you can gain it back very, very quickly. So that was really beneficial for me right now.
And how did you find the Ironman, like, psychologically? Or no, sorry, not Ironman, losing muscle during your Ironman training, like, psychologically, is it just something you just had to accept, or?
Do you know what? It's weird, because at the time, even though I lost 30 pounds and I look immensely different, and I put pictures side by side, and the contrast is incredible. Like, I look like a completely different person. But as you're going through that process, it's quite slow. You know, it happened over 8 months. And so I didn't actually even really notice it in myself. And I'm quite a goal-orientated person. So if I'm focused on doing something, like when I decided I wanted to do the Ironman, that was, I became a triathlete, really. I didn't care about having muscle. I was like, you know what, I'm going to sink my teeth into this and get it done. So it didn't really bother me. it bothered me the day after I finished the Ironman, and I took my pictures because I was like, right, I've got to take pictures after the Ironman when it's all done. So that's my start point for bodybuilding again. And I looked at it and I was like, holy shit. Because in my mind, I wasn't a triathlete anymore. I was a wannabe bodybuilder. And I looked at my start point and I was like, oh my God, this is horrendous. So that was more challenging for me. But going through the process, it was actually really enjoyable. I loved it. I was eating 6,000 calories a day, eating what I wanted. Training was hard and challenging and new and different. So I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, to be fair.
And how did you, like, what did it feel like doing it? As in, what did you learn from it? Like, obviously it takes a lot of mental toughness to do something like that. Like, even thinking about it actually scares me, to be honest. So, how did you find that? Like, what did you kind of learn from it mentally?
Well, mentally was, do you know what? Mentally, I knew I was going to be all right because of my military background, and I'd done some stuff in the military that's deemed quite difficult or challenging. So I knew psychologically I was there. I knew I was able to do it, but physically I completely underestimated it. And whilst I trained hard, I didn't really train effectively. I didn't follow any sort of triathlon program. I was just kind of winging it. I was just going out and doing hours on the bike and doing bits and bobs, learning to swim. I couldn't do the swimming stroke prior to starting. So that was a lot of my focus, was learning to swim. But what I schoolboyed it massively on the day. It was a really, really hot day. We had a heat wave in the UK at the time, and it was in Bolton. And I just didn't take on enough salts. Like, I really underestimated my nutrition throughout the event. And then when I got onto the marathon, I had cramps in my quads literally from the second I started running. So that was psychologically and physically the hardest thing I've ever done. The marathon, after having done all of that, my legs were just completely shot. So it was just a case of one foot in front of the other. You know, it was like a Forrest Gump scene.
I just can't even imagine that. Like, but again, like, after you had completed it then, and like, even looking back, like, what you probably learned from that coming forward, it even about the muscle loss, but it just in general for you as a coach as well, being able to go through something like that. Like, obviously you can relate to anybody in that kind of situation now.
Yeah, it does help. And all of these things that we do, that we put ourselves through and that we challenge ourselves with, allow us to resonate or get on a similar level to somebody who's done something similar or wants to do something similar. So it's another feather in the cap, I guess. I've got guys and girls who are endurance athletes who are concerned about body composition. So I can speak to them on a level that they understand and I understand. So it does definitely help. But to be honest, I just did it because I'm a weirdo and I just love sadistic stuff like that.
And you actually touched on it there about the army and that you were in the military, because anytime I hear of people doing things like that, I swear it's always a military background. They always do.
Yeah.
But that's actually something I wanted to touch on. So we actually met a few months ago, and obviously we have things in common, being from being in the same industry. But I also think we have a lot in common kind of background growing up. I'd say it's safe to say that two of us probably weren't A-grade students or growing up, and that obviously led you to the army before you got into fitness and online coaching. So what kind of lessons did the army teach you?
Yeah, I mean, the army's a strange place because it's got a real diverse mix of people. And I think a lot of people who maybe haven't been in the military have this notion that anyone that was in the military becomes this like ultra routined, regimented, strict, disciplined person because of what it instills in you. When actually it's really quite the opposite. You know, you do get a lot of guys and girls who are from broken homes, from rough upbringings, who don't abide by the rules and are relatively lawless within the confinements of being in the military. You know, you get guys who are absolute nightmares, who are always in and out of trouble with the military police and things of that nature. So this idea that you become this disciplined person is really quite far-fetched and just left for Hollywood, essentially. Yeah. But I think if it's intrinsically within you, those sort of character traits, then it does heighten that and it does bring it out. And I think I must have been one of those people because it did just set me on a path of liking my structure, liking my routine. And you know, I was a young lad growing up in Northwest London who had never seen a field or a hill or anything like that. So to be exposed to all of that and to be shown physically how much I could push myself and how much I could challenge myself was really, that was the most powerful thing that I took from the military, was you're capable of a lot more than you think if you're willing to, you know, apply yourself, put in some elbow crease and train for something. Training means so much more to me than just looking or feeling a certain way. It's about preparing yourself for life. And the military really did bring that out of me, you know, going through some of the toughest military courses that there are and coming out the other end of it and going, well, actually, if I looked at that on the surface before I'd started training for it, I would have thought it was impossible. But by going through the process of actually just turning up every day and doing a little bit more and getting yourself ready and then showing that you can do it at the end, was the biggest lesson that I took from the army, definitely. And I apply that into everything that I do now outside.
And I think that's very powerful. And I think something you touched on there was obviously the kind of stereotype of the military is that routine discipline. But essentially what you are saying is it's more about what you get out of it. It's not that it's bet into and you automatically have this. You still have to actually want to do it and intrinsically choose to do it. Because again, you could just go the opposite way and come out and literally everything that what is meant to be installed in you is thrown out the window and you go do the opposite, you know. So I think that's very actually powerful. So just to move on, I'm just wanted to cover more some diet things now. So obviously you deal with a lot of photo shoot and competition prep clients who go through long dieting periods. So do you have any kind of particular strategies or diet hacks that you like to use with your clients that say commonly come up?
Yeah, I've got a few really, and I was just on a podcast recently talking about some of these strategies, and one of the ones that we spoke about, that the guy that I was speaking with, Matt, was the rapid fat loss protocol and how I use that with clients, and it's something that I use quite frequently. And essentially, it's just basically a period of time at the beginning of a diet. And now this is very individual dependent, and I can talk about examples when I would consider not using it. But it's a period of time at the very beginning where we basically push the client a little bit more aggressively with their fat loss, because at the beginning of a diet, their hunger is at their lowest, their energy is at their highest, their motivation is at its highest. And so we capitalize on all of those things, and we, like I say, go a bit more aggressive with the deficit. So where normally we might put someone in a 15 or 20% deficit of calories from their maintenance, we might go 30 or even 40%, again, dependent on the individual. And that really quick fat loss that we see in the early stages of the diet gets a huge amount of buy-in from the client, because they're like, holy shit, this is working. I'm dropping loads and loads of pounds here. You know, I've dieted for weeks and weeks before and not seen this, and I'm seeing it in the first week. And also it just gets us ahead of the curve in terms of how quickly we achieve what we want to achieve, all with kind of minimal impact on the individual, because of those things that we mentioned previously. Their adherence is high, their motivation's high, their hunger's low, their energy's high. So the rapid fat loss protocol works really well. And then essentially what I would do, so we'd run that for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the kind of biofeedback I'm getting from that person. How are your hunger levels? How are your cravings? How's energy? When those things start to slip, then we'd consider just getting them back into a more moderate deficit. But prior to doing that, we'll just have like a bit of a refeed or a diet break, back at maintenance calories for a few days, restore all of those markers, and then get into a more moderate deficit of 15 or 20%. And that works really well. So I use that quite a lot. That's one thing that I do.
That's actually really interesting. And yeah, I'm glad you kind of said it then about the time frame of between like 2 to 4 weeks. So it's not a thing of this is forever. And then you do strategically put in periods like that, a diet break or like maintenance phase, and then kind of a more moderate deficit. Because I think obviously some people are they do like the extreme approach, but they try to do it forever. And again, like you're saying, it's when you use this, it's a strategy for a limited period of time. And I think that's where, for a lot of people, like obviously they have you as a coach, so it's really good that you're like, okay, now it's time to move. But that's where sometimes people on their own make the mistake of, because they see this real rapid progress, they're like, just go a bit more, just go a bit more. And then before you know it, they're literally back to square one, because they're everything, like all the things you mentioned, all their markers have gone down, you know. So again, that's another really interesting topic, and the strategy that you use. I also seen you put, it was a video on social media, can't remember the exact one, but it was more about, was it increasing food volume as the diet, the longer the diet goes? I thought it was really interesting. If you can touch on that.
Yeah. So what I do is basically try and get my guys and girls to start their diets with as much highly palatable, high calorie foods in as possible. So typically speaking, what somebody does when they're not being coached is they start a diet, and the first thing they do is they get rid of all the foods that they enjoy. And again, a big generalization, but most of the foods that people enjoy are high sugar, high fat, high calorie, dense foods. So they leave the diet instantly because I'm on a diet, right? I need to get rid of those foods, which kind of makes sense on the surface. But if we keep those foods in at the beginning of the diet, and you know, within moderation and within your caloric needs, and we see fat loss, we'll reach a point inevitably where fat loss starts to slow down, we start to plateau, and we need to make an adjustment to calorie intake. Now, what we can do is, because we still got those hedonic high calorie foods in, is we can just remove those ever so slightly, not all of them at once, but we can just remove some and replace for slightly more nutrient dense, higher volume foods. So by doing that, we've reduced calorie intake, but we've increased food volume. So it gives that feeling of, I'm eating more food, but I'm still losing more weight now. This is crazy. And that's where you get people saying, I'm eating more food than I've ever eaten and I'm losing weight. It's like, no, you're eating less calories. You're just eating a slightly more sensible diet with vegetables and fruits and fiber and things of that nature. So yeah, that's something that I do, is keep the high calorie palatable foods in, and then taper them down and gradually replace them with more nutrient dense, high volume foods. And that works really well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good strategy, because obviously then as the longer the diet goes on, you're essentially increasing the amount of micronutrients you're getting, which is like a common saying is, you know, you want a calorie deficit, not a nutrient deficit. So that's where that works really well. And for actually curbing hunger, it's great. And also for the client, when you decrease calories, most people usually have that mindset of like, oh, I'm like down to a rice cake. I'm down to 2 rice cakes. But whereas when you do that and you switch foods, they're like, oh yeah, they feel like they're nearly eating more. And that on like hunger on a psychological level is great, you know, especially as the diet continues.
Yeah.
So is there any other kind of strategies that you kind of implement regularly with your clients that you find very effective for dieting?
Yeah, again, this is one that I was speaking to Matt Peacock about on Instagram Live, and it's something that we both use as well. And it's not necessarily a strategy. Well, I guess it is a strategy, but it's something that's massively overlooked, in particular in, you know, individuals who are dieting without maybe a coach, is diet breaks. You know, diet breaks are massively important. So it's basically a period of time that we're eating back at maintenance calories or just above, but usually maintenance calories. You know, I use the analogy of digging a hole. So, because quite often getting a client to buy into the idea that we need to spend time back at maintenance calories is quite tough. You know, they're seeing all this progress with fat loss, and you say, okay, we're going to eat back at maintenance calories for a week. They're actually quite reluctant to go through that process because they want to keep progressing and keep pushing. So in that instance, I use the analogy of digging a hole. So if you've got 2 individuals digging a hole, one of them just continues digging for as long as they can, and one of them regularly stops to come up for air, for some food and for some water. The person who stops, i.e. the diet breaker, is more inclined to reach their destination because they've taken the appropriate recovery principle into action. So, you know, spending 5 to 7 days back at maintenance calories will just allow things like leptin and ghrelin to re-regulate, so that hormonally we're in a good place. Hunger levels come down, cravings come down, energy levels go up. Psychologically, it's really rewarding, and it gives that feeling of, I'm ready to go again now. Let's hit the diet again. So all in all, it's like taking 1 step back to take 2 steps forwards. Whereas when you have an individual who isn't being coached and isn't going through diet breaks, they're trying to hammer the nail all the time. they're going to burn out, and they're going to, like you say, go through that phase of just eating and inhaling everything and regressing back to square one. So diet breaks is something that I use with absolutely everyone. Typically every sort of 8 to 10 weeks, there'll be a diet break in there.
Yeah, I'm actually the same. And I find you touched on the psychology there is, I think that's the hardest thing, especially when you have a client for the first time who's never done a diet break, and to get that buy-in. And for me as well, I try to explain it like, we actually, because what happens is a lot of times they won't do it, or they'll come back and they're like, oh yeah, I just stayed eating at this. And I'm like, we actually need to be at maintenance to get for it to actually work. You know, essentially you're staying in a deficit. But it's one of those things, most people will tell me, they're like, oh, I don't need one, I'm fine. And I'm like, the way I put it is like, you think you're fine, but I guarantee you'll come back after a week and tell me, oh, you actually feel great, like you feel so much better. And I think it's just getting that psychology around it. I find it the first time, once the first time is done and it goes well, they see and feel the benefits. Because a lot of time with dieting, it's even like you don't realize any of the adaptations are happening because you're in it. It's like you're saying with the hole, you're in the hole. You don't know what it's like to be out of it. And then when you actually take a few days out, you realize you're like, man, I was actually really irritable the last week, wasn't I?
Yeah.
So,
and the crazy thing is that when they go back to maintenance calories, is usually, you know, you'll have them report back after they'll just off their own backs report to you after 2 or 3 days of being back at maintenance calories. I'm still losing weight. I've had a new low weigh-in this morning. I slept amazingly, and it's like, this is why we're doing it. You know, we're not doing it just because science. We're doing it because this is what we're looking for. We're looking for your sleep to upregulate. We're looking for your stress levels to come down. We're looking for your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so the way that you're moving unconsciously, to increase. We're looking for all of those adaptations. So, you know, explaining all of those things to our clients prior to going through the process is vitally important to get them to come around to the idea, to get them to buy into it. Some of them will come around instantly. You know, the guys and girls who just love eating, like you tell them you're going to eat back at maintenance, they're like, I'm in. Okay, you don't need to explain anything to them. But some who are like the more robotic, kind of hell-bent on progressing, the ones that would eat chicken and broccoli standing on one leg if you told them to, they're the ones that you need to convince, this is why we're doing it and this is how it's going to help you progress. But yeah, you know, it works. It's not magic. It is science. But psychologically getting people to do it is quite tough sometimes.
Yeah, and it's funny because those people that you were saying that would stand on one leg, they're probably the ones that need it the most.
Yeah.
And then you have the other end of the spectrum where those people are like, oh, we're taking a diet break this week. You're like, no, actually, you're
probably
fine.
Don't need it.
Yeah, it's like you're a good few weeks away from a diet break.
Yeah.
But it's fun, and that's where I think the whole kind of art of coaching comes in. Like you said there, you kind of schedule every 8 to 10 weeks, but would you go more off the feedback from the client than saying, okay, this is 8 weeks, you have to diet break?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try wherever possible to pre-plan them, to schedule them in so that the client has got a bit of a timeline that they know. And we'll try and work it around, you know, if somebody's got a social event in 9 weeks' time where they potentially need to be consuming more calories, then of course we're just going to adapt it to that. So we try and plan it in, and I'll say at the beginning of the diet, you know, this is going to be about an 8-week push, and then we're going to take a diet break, roughly, depending on where we're at and what's happened in that time. But it is completely dependent on the person. You know, if someone's markers are in a great place, they're making insane progress and they feel good, and then we'll push it on a little bit. And conversely, if it needs to be brought forwards because someone made crazy progress at the beginning and now they're starting to flag, then we'll bring it forward. So that's, like you say, the coaching element is knowing when to use these tools and when not to.
Yeah, and I think for you as well, like that's what I do the same, of having at least a template of maybe around when. Well, like when you're working with a client that has like a photo shoot or a competition as well, you kind of can't just wing it because there's a deadline. Whereas if it's just a general client, that's where I'd still probably call them diet breaks, but I'm more like the social. Yeah, it's like a social break, you know, for a week.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I think as well, knowing the difference between kind of client you're working with can kind of dictate your decision making on those things.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up, I know I've already taken enough of your time.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So any kind of just final thoughts? So what we actually went through was kind of home workouts, and essentially I think the message there is not to worry. Once you're taken care of, doing what you can and focusing on the other things. And I think that's kind of the message throughout. Like you mentioned with the army, it's more about dealing what you take from the current situation more so than it's actually something I was thinking the other day. It's sometimes you can't change the external environment, but the way you internally respond to it and what you make of every situation is essentially more important, you know?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I'm getting my clients to look at now to help with their perspective and their view of this whole situation is that the one saving grace in all this, and as awful as it sounds, is that everybody's going through it. Absolutely everybody. So there's not that feeling of being hard done by. There's not that feeling of, why is this happening to me? It's happening to everyone. So actually now you're in a position where you're on a level playing field with the rest of the universe. Sure, you know, there's some people that have got elaborate home gyms and they're just like, whatever, no difference. But for the most part, we're all on a level playing field, and you actually have an opportunity now to put yourself on a higher potential than a lot of people. If you can change this, and if you can get your mindset in the right place, then you're going to do far better than everybody else who's on a bit of a downer. So just focus on what you can control and ignore what you can't is the message.
Yeah, definitely 100%. Yeah, so thanks a million for your time, Ollie. I know you're a busy man, and we will, just to all the listeners, there was a couple of bits where it got a bit shady with the connection, but hopefully I think most of it was okay. And again, thanks a million for coming on and giving your time. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you very much, dude.
No worries. And we will see you all in the next episode.